Welcome to the Foreign Correspondents Club of Japan. My name is Michael Penn. I'm the president of the Shingetsu News Agency, and I'll be your moderator for today. I've just had a very interesting conversation already with our guests, who are in many ways at the forefront of a new global movement, I would say. And so for those few of you who have shown the intelligence to show up to this press conference, you will find that actually some really interesting information being delivered here. We have three guests. Sitting here next to me is Mr. Pieter Franken. He is the co-founder of Safecast, which is the organization that will be profiled today. In the middle there is Mr. Azby Brown. He is the lead author of the Safecast report. And at the far end of the table is Kyoko Kiki Tanaka, who is the volunteer coordinator for Safecast Japan. Each of the three people will be speaking for roughly 10 minutes apiece before we get into the Q&A section. The order in which they will speak, I believe, will be first Mr. Franken, and then Ms. Tanaka, and then finally Mr. Brown, correct?
Yes.
If you have a mobile phone or anything that would make noise, please put it on manner mode. All right, well, with no further ado, let's move straight into it, because I do think there's some interesting areas to be covered. Mr. Franken, why don't you take over?
Yes. Mr. Ben, thank you very much. I'm going to start today. My name is Pieter Franken. I started Safecast 5 years ago, literally the day after the disaster happened. And I want to talk a little bit about what is Safecast, how did we start, what we see as our achievements, and where we're going next. As we all know, it's now a little over 5 years ago that the disaster of the earthquake happened, and with that the Fukushima Daiichi the disaster started. When that happened, the immediate problem that we all faced was lack of information about what was happening in Fukushima. And it was very difficult to get any indicator if we were at risk or not at risk, and what about our safety, and what do we do. And initially, we looked at the news and the press to see what was happening, but basically because there was a structural lack of ability to measure radiation across Japan, there was very, very limited information available as to what was evolving. And so as that was happening, we decided to do something different. And basically, the day after the accident, myself together with Joe Ito and Sean Bonner, three of us started a group called Safecast. And our goal was initially just to collect data and put it together and show it to people by putting it on a website. So we thought we could just assemble information. That turned to be not a good idea, because the data was basically not available, or it was copyright protected, or it was not usable for what we want to do with it. We tried to buy Geiger counters and hand them out to people in the field, but Geiger counters were sold out in the first 24 hours, and the lead time after the accident was 6 to 12 months. So it was a great idea, but it was not executable either. So what we decided to do was, we had a few Geiger counters that were donated to us at that time, a handful of equipment, and we decided to use that equipment in a more efficient manner. And what we did is we grouped together with more volunteers, people that were engineers, people that could write software, people that could reach out to community, people that could communicate, and we basically started to build a system that could be put on a car and be driven around, very much like how Google makes Google Street Map view. It's the same idea, but then instead of taking a picture, we would take radiation measurements. It was about in the 4th week after the accident that we had reached the point where we were starting to build the system, and a week after that, on April 23rd and April 24th, we had our system ready. We did a test run in Tokyo, and on the next day we left for Koriyama to make our measurements. And here you can kind of see the system on a car. You see there's two little boxes, kind of look like bento boxes, and that's how we called the system the Bento Geiger counter system, and we shortened it to B-Geigi, so that you will hear me talk about that. So what is that? That is the system. And so we basically, initially the system was rather big. It required a separate computer, was a little bit hard to operate, but over time as we were taking more measurements, we saw that we could actually have people do these measurements themselves. So we shrunk the system to a level where people in Fukushima could operate it themselves, which we did about in the 3rd month after the accident, or 2nd, 3rd month. And people were able to go do that themselves. Later on, we further evolved the system into even smaller size, and we made it such that people can build this themselves. So it's basically a kit that anybody on worldwide can obtain, and with that kit you can measure radiation anywhere you like. System is waterproof and shockproof, which is very important if you want to do measurements in the field. So it's rather unique in that sense. Most Geiger counters are extremely sensitive to both water and shock, so we made it so that it is very rugged. So over the last 5 years, we have built a total of 1,000 devices of various generations, and because people can build these themselves, here you actually see a picture of a group of volunteers in Fukushima during a workshop where we build many of these devices together. And by building many of these, we were able to start spreading the reach of our measurements. So you have to understand that people basically, people decide themselves, citizens themselves decide where they're going to measure. It's what we call a power of pool. It's a pool model where people say, I want to measure my neighborhood. And because lots of measurements in 5 years ago and even today were lacking largely outside of the immediately affected areas that were evacuated, lots of people were extremely worried and had no data. So we basically enabled citizens to get street-level information about their own house, their school, their workplaces, places they care about. And that created a lot of pull across Fukushima, but also across Japan. You may recall that there were lots of discussions as to how far did the fallout go. And people were equally worried if they were in Kyoto, Tokyo, or Fukushima, because if you don't know, you fear the worst. So we started to collect all these measurements. Here you see a snapshot of the current radiation map we have. Over the last 5 years, we have collected over 43 million radiation measurements, largely in Japan, but over the last 2 years, we also have measured many locations outside of Japan with volunteers that were able to build this themselves. Most of this data is uploaded by volunteers, and it is available to the public. So we use it to make maps, but there's lots of other people that use this data for lots of other purposes as well. So here, the snapshot here is of Fukushima. So I want to spend a few moments to talk a little bit about the data. We have literally been doing this for 5 years, and I'm going to show you slices of time out of our data set, in 6 months time slices. And I will start with March to September 2011. So these are the first measurements our volunteers took. And the colors, kind of blue kind of indicates lower levels, red, intermediate, and yellow to white is increasingly higher. It's a logarithmic scale. So I'm just going to focus, if you look here, you can see that the lake is where Aizu Wakamatsu is, and to the right you have Koriyama, Nihonmatsu, and Fukushima City. This is where most of the population in Fukushima Prefecture actually is. And then to the right is Daiichi, where you don't see any data there at this point, because at that time we were not able to go in. And you kind of see areas around that. So as you can see, you can also see in our initial measurements, the city down to the bottom right is Iwaki. It's relatively low. Aizu Wakamatsu is relatively low, and the cities in the middle are relatively high. Very important to notice here is that distance wasn't really a good indicator of levels of radiation. And inside cities, as we started to measure inside Koriyama, we also noticed that inside the city, the levels were very unpredictable. You could have a factor of 10 difference within a couple of 100 meters. So it became increasingly important to do much more detailed surveys. Specifically, if you live there, you can imagine that, if the differences are so big that you really want to know what it is for your area, for your direct environment. So I'm going to slide through. So as I'm sliding through, if you look carefully, you will see that the colors, and specifically you focus on the cities around Koriyama, etc., colors are slowly fading into purple and then into blue. You can also see that the amount, these are literally 6 months time slice. You can see that, Daiichi itself has been measured, obviously very high inside the plant. But what is important here is that the levels over the last 5 years have come down quite a bit for various reasons. And the amount of drop we have seen now of measuring 5 years is more than what you would expect based on the half-life of cesium itself. So there are all kind of mechanisms at work that have to do with wear and tear or decontamination, etc. But if you look at, for example, city like Koriyama, places that were measuring, for example, like 2 microsieverts an hour, they have come down maybe to half a microsievert or less. So there is a significant change in that sense. And then in some areas, the levels are basically returning to pre-disaster levels. I'm just going to go a little bit further. This is as of March last year. You can also see that we measured the ocean a little bit. And this is the most recent 6 months time slice, and we're almost ready for the next one. So here you can kind of clearly see that levels around the main cities in Fukushima have come down. And this is it as of now. Okay, so this kind of shows the amount of data we have collected. Today we're at over 43 million. In January we're around 40 million. And you can kind of see that the acquisition rate is not linear, it's increasingly. And it has to do with the fact that more and more people are knowing about our project and starting to participate. We're doing about well over 1 million measurements per month with our volunteers worldwide. Very quickly, one other thing we have done about 2 years ago, we realized that there is a need to not only do kind of survey, kind of baseline mapping, that's what we've been doing for 5 years, but also to go to one location and measure 24 hours non-stop. That is the PointCast project, and the PointCast project, if you look here, this is in Odaka. This is a group of volunteers, and we have installed here a fixed sensor, and I'm going to zoom in a little bit. You can see the actual radiation point on top of the entrance and the sensor to the right. So with that, we can measure. If you go to our website, you can see the radiation levels in various cities, not only in Japan, but also worldwide. Key thing I already mentioned is one of the key drivers behind our data. It is 100% open. It's public domain. We do not attach any copyrights whatsoever to our data set, and anybody can download it and can do anything they want to do with that. We have, over the last 2 years, have shifted some of our energy and attention to air pollution, not for Japan, but for other areas on our planet. And we recently have finished a few prototypes of systems that are currently being tested in LA, in the US, to measure various air quality indicators like PM or various gases. Very quickly on the impacts of the work we have been doing. Sorry, I skipped this slide there. Okay, but key thing, initially we helped lots of people in Fukushima and affected areas to better realize what was happening, also rebuild trust. One of the real problems was with part of the data that was there, people didn't trust it. And the best way to deal with that is to go and do it yourself. So through our volunteers and through our efforts to be independent, lots of people started to trust the data and make more rational decisions around that. The way we work has become kind of a de facto standard for doing radiation measurement. We're talking to lots of groups in Japan and specifically outside of Japan, where people want to replicate how we are able to measure a nuclear disaster after it has happened. Citizen science groups like ourselves, I think, are being taken more and more seriously as a way to solve problems that otherwise are not very easy to solve by centralized organizations. The importance of openness is a big thing we have been pushing, and I think we have had various impacts. Another thing is lots of people are studying how we're working, and it's become an inspirational source for younger generations of how to, how to basically take action in a way that is very, very data-driven. This is just one example. This is fairly recently. One of our volunteers became a congressman in Taiwan, and at his inauguration speech, he showed the same big Aigi to the diet in Taiwan as an example of how he's going to work on environmental-related things, which is one of his agendas. Very quickly, what is next is we're working. Yes, okay. We're working on air quality. This is our big next project. We're working on a version of this that is not a kit, but basically finished end product, so that people that don't want to solder can basically get it and use it right away. So this is a next step. PocketCast is to make this smaller. And we're also working on fixed sensors that are slightly more compact and slightly more affordable for our volunteers. Just want to quickly mention, next week we are in Washington, D.C. We're invited there to participate in activities around the Nuclear Security Summit, and we hope to contribute there with our project to how specific problems that are part of that summit could be solved. I would like to give the word to Kiki.
Thank you very much for coming today. My name is Kyoko Kiki Tanaka. I'm a Japanese volunteer. I have been working with them since April 2011. My tasks are mainly coordinating Japanese people and also translation. I think personally, I'm connecting between Japanese society and English society. As you know, Safecast is English-based, and then Japanese informations are very limited. So translation team translate English text into Japanese and then try to inform to Japanese people. And meanwhile, Fukushima people are helping us to measure the radiation, especially the early time, 2011, 2012, around that time. Fukushima volunteers' cooperation was enormous to us. Without their help, we wouldn't be here. So I'd like to introduce some of the volunteers of Safecast, especially mainly Fukushima people. Mainly Japanese volunteers, I'm sorry. Should I say the diagrams?
Oh, it's okay.
Sorry. Japanese volunteers are much smaller volume than English volunteers, but we have mainly one big group is located in Fukushima, Koriyama, Fukushima City, Iwaki, Aizu Wakamatsu, and Itatemura Village, and Tomioka also. Their reason to be volunteer is mainly for the next generation, or try to tell the fact to people. They feel responsibility to do this for next generation, or also to people, but basically to the world. Other peoples are located in Tokyo or other big cities. Their main tasks are various, but I would say mainly translation or the communication teams. And then their motivation is that they like to help Fukushima people. So this kind of different angle, but they all want to do something for people after 3/11. Okay. About Fukushima volunteer people, they have very, as I'm sure you know this, they have been through many hardships. Inside Fukushima, many people knew that Fukushima is highly, contaminated or affected, but they didn't know what was going on at the time. That's why they were looking for the information, and then some of them, most of the Fukushima volunteers now for Safecast, they were looking for the information, and then they found us, and then they were really delighted to find us because we are pro data. We don't criticize nor judge anyone. We just give data and then tell them how to read the data. They were very appreciative about it, and then at the same time, they told us that they feel relieved. There was such neutral group existed because they were in a very confused or chaotic time. They went through chaotic time. Inside Fukushima, some people really against something. Some people really just tried to follow the government, or it was very difficult for people to judge by themselves. So for pro data, like showing data was something they could feel secure about themselves. Let me introduce some of the words from Fukushima volunteers. One volunteer told me this. 5 years after the disaster, we were getting exhausted. We just like to know the correct information, but our circumstance does not allow it. when I talk about radiation or Daiichi accident, I find some people obviously against me. This person is from Aizu. He told me the fixed sensor, there are many fixed sensors located in Aizu, not only Aizu, in Fukushima prefecture all over right now, but in Aizu particularly will be removed all except one next year. He also says that keep measuring is very important for potential future victims of radiation accident. One more volunteer from Fukushima. Well, he has a young children, and then he moved to outside of Fukushima, and then his family did not care about radiation while playing outside different prefecture, and he realized it was the first time since 3/11 he didn't think about radiation. He was shocked when he found out it by himself, because that was nature before 3/11. And next, I'd like to explain a little bit about translation team. We have about 10 Japanese people who are doing translation, and then what we're doing is mainly translating English blog or website into Japanese, and also the Safecast report, which Azby wrote. We are translating from English to Japanese. Right now, executive report is already done in Japanese. It's already done. So this, yeah, and they all are highly interested in Safecast activities. And they think, since Safecast is an English-based organization, our transition works are very essential. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming today. My name is Azby Brown, and I've been volunteering with Safecast. Gradually became involved this summer and fall of 2011. My background, well, I'm from New Orleans, in the United States. My educational background is architecture and art, and for a lot of people like me as well, the disaster of March 11th was life-changing, and I find myself doing a lot of things I was not doing before then. One of the sort of roles that I ended up having within Safecast was research and vetting information. As you know, there's lots of, good, bad, unverifiable information out there, and I just found myself sort of temperamentally suited to reading reports and fact-finding and double-checking and making summaries to share with our community, and also with journalists. And after a while, we decided that it would be good to put this into a report. The first one was issued a year ago, the Safecast Report Volume 1, and Volume 2 is now ready. And some of you have picked up the executive summary of that by the door. I'm just going to describe the contents of the report without taking too much time. And one thing I want to stress is that our attitude, our approach is a bit different. I mean, there's quite a lot of reports issued by various groups, environmental groups, activist groups, etc., for the 5th anniversary, and also lots of government commentary and commentary from the official agencies. And most of them, some of them are actually very, very good, and there's worthwhile information in almost all of them. But for the most part, they are generally intended to support an agenda, and our attitude is no, we're just going to try to show people where they can find information to make their own decisions. And so that's really a very different approach, sort of describing what experts are saying, where you can find the information, is third-party verification available for the information or not, etc. In the report, the first part is a little similar to what Pieter was describing about what's happening with our project itself, and especially over the past year with certain developments. And the second part is what we call the situation report, which is divided into several sections. The first section deals with what's happening at Fukushima Daiichi itself. And of course, most of the information for this comes from TEPCO. And, that is poses difficulties for anyone who wants to verify it. They're getting better and better at releasing information. They're getting better at giving access to journalists to the plant itself. You can find certain things out. Some things you can be inferred by researchers testing water in the ocean, for instance. But there's a lot you don't know. We described the plans that TEPCO has for the decommissioning and how long it's supposed to take, and in what ways the schedule is slipping, and what ways they may be ahead of schedule. As everyone knows, they're not sure how long it's going to take, and that actually makes a lot of sense. They're thinking 30 to 40 years. It'll be a long time. It's a multi-generational task. We look a lot at the water problems, which make the news all the time. This frozen underground wall that's they're hoping will be able to stop the flow into the reactor buildings. And there's lots of issues with this, a lot of setbacks and some success. So we look at the water treatment, these pumping systems, these systems they have to remove radionuclides from the water, which actually seem to be one of the bigger success stories. They seem to be working pretty well. But of course, there's no third-party verification of the quality of the water that comes out in most cases, so you sort of have to take their word for it. But it looks pretty effective. As everyone knows, nobody's really sure exactly where the melted fuel debris is. They're pretty sure it's down the bottom of this PCV, the primary containment vessel, in this concrete area called the pedestal underneath this containment. And they're making robots and all sorts of things to go in there and get imagery and take measurements, and it's taking a long time. But I think they're having moderate and sort of steady success with that, and maybe within this year we'll begin to see some of the first images of that sort of thing. The big story for Fukushima, I think, for everybody is the human story, what's happening with evacuees and returnees, people who want to return, people who don't want to return. As many of you know, the number of evacuees is gradually decreasing, which means two things. One, people are returning, and some people have decided to change their address to someplace else, like Tokyo or Miyagi. And the number now of evacuees is now below 100,000 for the first time, and about a little more than half of those are in Fukushima, and a little bit less than half is outside Fukushima. And there's a lot to know about the sentiment of these people, who wants to return, who doesn't want to return, why, what are their grievances, what are they dissatisfied about. There's quite a lot of lawsuits happening in the last year, especially big ones. The situation for Itate village is very contentious, for instance. We do our best to describe what's happening there and where people can find information. The next section describes the environment in general, and specifically looking at the decontamination process. And as many of you know, it's hard to know how much radiation was actually released because the systems were inoperable when the accident was in full swing. But there's lots of ways to sort of back calculate it, and our previous report a year ago was giving figures like this regarding the ocean, and these are constantly being updated, and we do our best to stay in touch with the researchers themselves who are doing this kind of work, and we don't care if they're pro-nuclear, anti-nuclear. We listen to what they have to say and sort of try to line it all up, and some recent estimates by oceanographers who have been doing really good work sort of are refining, gradually narrowing the uncertainty of this sort of thing. For the decontamination process, again, it's very contentious, and there's a lot of issues with it. We're sort of looking at government data, what they say has been completed, and of course when they say a certain percentage has been completed, that means the percentage of the initial targets that they set. It doesn't mean all the houses, it means the houses that they decided should be completed, etc. And as many people are aware, the forest is one of the biggest issues, because more than 70% of Fukushima, basically where the radiation fallout landed, is forest. And there were a lot of decisions to be made. This is a map of Tamura from 2013. The colored areas are the valleys where the residential areas and the farms are, and everything in white is forest. It's mountainous. And the government basically did sort of a cost effectiveness analysis and and decided it really wasn't worth it. And there are many towns where the citizens have demanded that the government do decontaminate the forest, because after all, in a place like Fukushima, like many rural areas of Japan, a forest-based, a nature-based lifestyle is really one of the only reasons to live there and to stay living there, and it's also an economic resource. The cost of these things, it's sometimes hard to find good information, but we're looking at more recent estimates of the costs, which are always higher than the independent ones done by researchers, are always higher than what the government initially estimated. And particularly if you look at trying to decontaminate the forest, it's a massive amount of money, which, you know, it's understandable that the government balked at that. We look at the situation for food as well. And again, the good news about this is, like Safecast, who, you know, we are devoted to measuring environmental radiation, many groups sprung up, citizens groups sprung up to measure food. And this provides a very useful reality check against the government data. And it basically confirms what the government data shows, when you, especially when you understand that most of the people who go to a citizens-based food measurement lab to have something measured are measuring something they grew themselves, maybe mushrooms they picked. So we will find higher levels of contamination in that. It gives us a good idea of what the situation would be like if the government testing system was not in place. But basically it sort of reinforces it. And rice, for the last 2 years, the government has been testing every bag of rice produced in Fukushima, and for 2 years in a row, none of it was above 100 becquerels per kilogram. But there were several hundred bags in the 20 to 50 becquerels range, for instance. It's good to know that. Same thing for seafood. The levels shown to be contaminated has been going down very steadily, both things caught off of Fukushima and things caught in other prefectures, and we do our best to tell people what that system is all about, what's being caught and tested, where, when, how often, and show people where they can find their own information. And again, looking at independent data. The last section deals with health, and of course this is really the most contentious aspect of the entire disaster. Because, well, the risk of people getting sick, getting cancer, having other problems is actually very, very real in a nuclear disaster. It's easy, for instance, as we say, relatively easy to measure ambient radiation, and it's not that difficult to measure food, but to do health testing is really requires you know, a hospital and often government help. There have been many good local government programs for testing people's internal contamination and doing other kinds of screening. And for instance, in Minami Soma, where there's a very good program, we've seen it steadily decline. The percentage of people who are having internal contamination, for children it's been 0 for a couple of years now. Of course, that's based on a certain detection level, but it's been below 300 becquerels per body for about 2 years now, and adults is approaching 0. So this is good news. And it would be great if every town in Fukushima was reporting the data in as detailed a way and doing as conscientious a testing program, but they're not. Several are, but some are not. And again, one of the biggest things in the news has been the thyroid cancer found in young people in Fukushima, and we summarize the findings and also talk about you know, what expert opinion is saying about this. You know, some people are saying it's from radiation, and then quite a lot of experts are saying no, it's probably not, and it seems counterintuitive, but we sort of describe that debate and the evidence and how the evidence fits into the kinds of conclusions that experts are making. And that is the end of our presentation, and I think we're ready for a Q&A.
Okay, well, first of all, let's give him a hand for a very succinct... Okay, well, we have about 25 minutes for Q&A. The microphone has been set up on this side over here this time. When I call on you, please go to the microphone and identify yourself and your affiliation and ask your question. Try to limit yourself to one question, and since we do have a relatively small number of people, maybe we'll be able to come back to you if you have a second question later. We'll start with the working press. Any working journalists have any questions at this time? Christoph.
Süddeutsche Zeitung Neidhardt. I think I can use the one-question rule flexibly. My first question is, in the beginning, in 2011, when Greenpeace started to measure, I asked Greenpeace, how do your data relate to the government's data? And the Greenpeace said the government's data, okay, we have more or less the same. You seem to say a similar thing. Then I asked the Greenpeace. No, I had asked the government before. The government said Greenpeace is unreliable. So my question is, what's the Japanese government's, both the central government and local governments' attitude towards you? Okay. And maybe I just follow up with the second question. In Itate, in beginning of March or end of February, I saw that they do decontaminate some forests too. So can you explain that? Because you just said they don't. And we have heard many times that the decontamination is not actually working. I mean, they really destroy the soil. You cannot grow rice on these places at all anymore because the soil is gone. And at the end of the day, you have only slightly lower radiation, but you have no soil anymore. Now, your data seem to show that the radiation is going down more than slightly. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you very much. And I'll take your first question, and Azby, if you can take the second question. I'm just thinking how can I best answer your question by giving a few examples. When we talk about the government and what we measured, I think in the beginning, specifically in the first year or even 2 years, the big difference between our measurements and government measurements is that the level of granularity is very different. We measured all streets, every corner of Fukushima. The government only started to do that way later, as they got pressure from communities to go and do that. Because for the same reason that we did it, people started to say, why is the government not doing this? So I think one big difference is granularity, and it was important in this accident because there is very, very blotchiness in cities that require you to actually go and check it. Our measurements have primarily focused on measuring radiation on the road. So as you're driving, we measure. We are not able to measure on people's personal property, but people are volunteers with the system. They had also measured their own properties. They could find hotspots, etc. So I think this is one major difference. So in that, are the measurements different from the government? Because we measured more, we found, if the government would say we have one measurement at the city hall, which is X, then we would find X, but we also would find higher or Z lower because of the blotchiness. So that is one thing to understand. In terms of acceptance for or communication with the government, we have set up a program for local governments in Fukushima to participate with us, where a few cities in Fukushima actually are working with us to measure the city for them. So we have done it in a few cities now, and that is something where we have very direct communication with local government. That also has triggered many more discussions. We have been referred to in the diet report. We have had other offline discussions where to see how we can help. And most of the discussions kind of center around not exactly what we measure, because government is also measuring, but more about how do you build trust in communities, how to get the trust back. And we have basically been explaining that in acknowledging independent measurement groups like Safecast and many other groups that are out there actually is a way to start to create dialogues where people start to rebuild that trust. And independent verification, we strongly believe, is an essential part of democracy. Like journalists are doing that for the news, we're doing that for data. So I think that's where that stands. We never got a negative pushback, for that matter. I think it was more, maybe not acknowledging or whatever, but I think after 5 years, things have changed quite a bit. Outside of Japan, we also have lots of interactions with lots of other groups, including foreign governments that are very, very interested in the approach we took, including other, non-government organizations. So I think it is a step-by-step process, but I think the reason that is so is that we spend lots of effort on making sure our measurements are credible, even though it is done by a loose band of citizens and volunteers.
Okay, so about the second question, yes, the government decontamination policies are to decontaminate into the forest 20 meters away from any road or any house. So I'm not sure if what you saw would fit into that category. There have been test decontaminations of other deep forest areas, and as I mentioned, some communities are demanding that it be done. And there is, as you know, there's more than one government agency that's sort of involved in testing. There's the JAEA is doing its own testing, and then the Ministry of Agriculture, Forestry, and Fisheries is really making the policies, and, you know, they don't always agree. So I think what we'll see in the future will be some limited forest areas of Fukushima will be decontaminated, which means taking out all of that litter, all this fallen stuff on the ground to enable limited forestry, to enable recreational use and things like that. About the soil, yes, decontamination, in terms of effectiveness in lowering the dose rate at 1 meter above the ground, which is basically what they're looking at, it depends on how high it was at the beginning. I don't think there's any case where the decontamination has got it down to 0 or down to what it was before the disaster, but it can very easily lower it by half. But if you start with a very high level, like in a place like Itate, you can lower it by half and still have quite a lot of contamination. And when we did our own sort of independent check of decontamination back in 2013, we generally came to the conclusion that in a lot of cases it would be better to wait for the natural decay to take its toll. The decontamination schedule and policies are basically political decisions, though, and economic decisions. So a lot of it is to show that it's being done by governments and local and prefecture and central governments that know that a lot of people are never going to come back.
Okay, John.
John Boyd, freelance. There's been a lot of topsoil, contaminated topsoil taken and put into plastic bags by the look of it, and these have been mounted around Fukushima. Have there been any tests done around these sites? How dangerous might they be?
I'll take it. Yeah, there are a lot of tests, and the government itself is posting data and doing monitoring, and there's quite a few citizens groups that do monitoring. And well, as you wouldn't be surprised to know that if you get very close to it and on top of it, you can get very high dose rates, I said reasonably high dose rates. But when you're a few meters away, it's already a lot lower. They're supposed to be designed to prevent leakage into the groundwater, et cetera. I think they've gotten gradually better at that, but as you know, there was the case of hundreds of bags that got washed away in a flood last year in Itate, and you think, well, what were they thinking? You know, what were they thinking? So there's so much being done in so many locations where these bags are being stored. It's a management nightmare, and I think it's not surprising that some places are better run than others. That said, the government has made a plan to put a very large waste treatment facility, landfills, et cetera, around Fukushima Daiichi. This plan has been, I guess, publicized first more than 2 years ago. Very large thing, and in the towns of Okuma and Futaba. But they're having a very hard time getting a hold of the land. Either landowners don't want to sell, or they can't locate them, even though the city governments themselves have approved. So I talk about in the report, they've started to use another landfill in the town of Naraha called the Ecotech, it's in Tomioka near the Naraha border, called the Ecotech Clean Center, which is a lot smaller, but a very similar thing. And I get the feeling that they're just trying to get these bags put away as quickly as possible.
So just putting it into the ground?
No, they'll open the bags and make landfill, actually separate it. The high dose rate stuff, some of the leaves and stuff, they will burn and make ash and put that in casks in concrete buildings. And a lot of the other stuff will just be put in landfill and covered up with so-called impermeable layer and left there for 30 years, and then they're going to decide what to do with it.
Okay, I'm now opening it up to associate members or anybody else who wants to ask a question. Okay, while you're thinking, I'm going to jump in. During our discussion in the back, before, we mentioned the idea of data activism, but that hasn't come up in the press conference yet. So I'd like to ask you, what is data activism, and why do you think it's important in a context like this?
Okay, thank you for the question. We were indeed talking about that, and when we started this, we started from the viewpoint of right to know, and facts and data are basically indisputable. You measure something and you do something with that. However, data can be used in many, many different ways. And we have seen people measure only the high levels in Fukushima. We have seen people only measure the low levels. We see there is a need for measuring everything. And by doing that, we get a different view, or we get actually a much closer view of what the reality is. Specifically in environmental measurements, which we're focusing on. We started with radiation, but we're working on air pollution and water and etc. as well now. As a result of that, we see that there is a tremendous lack of information available. And whatever is available, there is data, but the data is not necessarily openly available. It is either simply not published, researchers don't publish their data, governments don't publish their data, companies don't publish their data. And that data itself will tell us a lot about what actually is happening in the environment. Yet, even though the data is not out there, lots of people have opinions, feelings, take action, whatever, based on primarily lack of data. So we strongly feel that having data itself is a very powerful starting point for discussions, and the structural lack of data is something we hope to fill in by using the power of ourselves to fill in the gaps. And as we can measure our own environments, we can't measure the planet, but we can measure our own neighborhoods. I think that is where some of that data activism can start. And from there, we can have more informed dialogues and make more informed decisions. So we strongly believe that data is the starting point, not not the opinion or the inferred, it must be wrong, it must be good. No, we must measure it. And we found out in Fukushima, when we started to measure, is that the reality was very different from what we all thought it was. We thought, first of all, 20 kilometers is a nice little circle. Turns out to be it's not a circle. We go into cities. Turns out to be that you can walk a block and have a very different value. And that kind of started us to get us inspired to say let's focus really on the data, and that can drive many other discussions. So we truly believe that there is a power of change in just measuring environmental data. Consistently, not the high, not the low, all of it. That is the point. So that is equally important.
Okay, back to the floor. Yes.
My name is Hayakawa. I'm an associate member. I come from a measurement instrumentation background, so I would like to ask you about the calibration of your tools. And you have so many measurement tools scattered around. The methods you've been taking to measure it is good, but how to maintain your calibration amongst all those number of instruments?
Okay. Thank you very much for the question. It's a question that comes up regularly. We did a few things when we started the project. We actually got people involved that actually design Geiger counters or radiation measurement equipment. We work with lots of scientists, and there's a few key things that we did to make sure that our measurements overall would be usable. One is that the devices that we use all use exactly the same sensor. So we do not use different types of manufacturing or different types. It's all exactly the same sensor. As you may know, that there's different types of ways to measure radiation, and each sensor has a slight different energy response curve, which will give slightly different measurements. So if you don't keep it consistent, you'll get you'll get kind of it's not really an error, but you get you can't really compare very well. So we wanted to make sure that we can at least compare accurately between here and here. The sensor we chose is actually a sensor that has been in production for the last 40 years or so. It's extremely well known in the scientific community, very well characterized, and it keeps its calibration for tens and tens of years. In the old days, Geiger counters were analog. They had a little needle that went up and down, and you needed to calibrate that electronics over time to make sure that it would still indicate the right level. These are digital devices. They don't use analog circuitry that needs trimming. So basically, it just keeps a count, and the count is digitally done. So instead of using analog circuitry, so it basically doesn't have the problems of older devices that have to be calibrated. On top of that, we have worked with laboratories worldwide. Various people independently have calibrated the device in their own laboratories and have come back and told us that our claims were fine. It does indeed measure over a wide range accurately radiation. And we keep on doing that. name some of the organizations, but some organizations are semi-government organizations that actually have measured that and have come back to us and basically said, yeah, perfectly fine. Some other government organizations actually are using these. So it has been, as we're an open organization, everybody can, test this and check it. And that's how we have been doing that. The other thing that's very important is that we use, basically, the people that measure don't know each other. They use the same equipment. And the idea is that as people more or less randomly measure their neighborhoods, there will be overlaps. And for example, in Fukushima, many places have been measured by different people many, many times. So there is a second effect is that what if one of these devices is broken or is off? It will show up and it will be triangulated by other people that are measuring. So that is the kind of the error correction is not by checking each device all the time. The fact that all the data measurement points can be overlapped and triangulated gives us another way to find possible mismatches in the data set. So these are the two mechanisms that we use.
John again.
You mentioned some people, some organizations may measure only the high levels, others low levels. I wonder, what do you do to make sure that your own citizen scientists are not maybe passionate enough to do the same?
Very, very good question.
You want to answer it? Yeah, this is something we get asked often, especially by people in government and official agencies. How do you make sure you're not getting malicious data? And we'd have to say that for any system, if someone really wanted to, they could. And technically, it would not be very hard. But we are trusting in, first of all, the crowdsourcing methodology, as Pieter was mentioning, to help spot those things when they happen. But the other side is that we have what do you call it, a quality control system, where every data upload, and we're getting dozens per day now, gets automatically sent to a team of about 8 people, and we check each upload. And if it's a place where we already have data that's been measured someplace nearby, it's fairly easy to know if it's really crazy or not. Most of the things would show up. We do occasionally get data that's surprisingly high. I could think of one example was some data from Rome. That was very, very high level. And we thought, is something wrong with the detector? What could this be? It turns out that Rome and many European cities, old cities, have a lot of granite on the streets and in the buildings, and St. Peter's Square apparently is a known hotspot because of the granite on the ground. Occasionally we'll find something and it'll turn out that the person forgot to turn it off when they sent it to the X-ray machine at a museum or in the airport. And we will contact these people. People are allowed to participate anonymously, and that makes sense in certain countries that have maybe restrictive governments or just for people to protect their privacy, but we have a valid email address for everyone, so we do ask people. And there have been other cases. A team from Czechoslovakia sent some data, very high radiation levels on the ground. We emailed them and says, yes, in fact, we were measuring a former uranium processing facility, and this is what we expected to find. So the fact is we have humans in the loop, and judgment will always play a role, and we're constantly thinking about what we will need to do to partly automate this in the future as we get more and more uploads.
I think just to add on to that, there's another. We don't recruit our volunteers. Our volunteers come to us randomly in a way. So we don't know if people have if they have an agenda or what their agenda is. But because it is randomly, and then if you do this at a larger scale, we do this at a relatively large scale, it starts to balance out. If you would do it with 5 people, then if there is a bias in that will have a bigger effect than if you do it with 1,000 people or more. So the whole fact that the project has progressed over 5 years also has to do with the fact that lots of different people with different reasons have been participating and slowly have been filling. And most people measure in their neighborhoods. They're for whatever reason, they have a reason. There is a reason for which they want to measure their neighborhood, and that has been a prime driver. And the reasons are very different, and that has been kind of makes it independent.
Okay, Christoph has the last question.
outside Tohoku, the interest in Fukushima and the tsunami is fading rapidly. Can you say something about the enthusiasm of your volunteers, and is it fading primarily in Fukushima, but also other places in Japan? And how about Japan? Japan is not known for having very enthusiastic citizens. Can you compare that to other countries and say something about your air project as well?
Okay. I found Fukushima since 3/11. It's been 5 years, as we all know, and then some people continue working as a volunteer, like three of us or so, and then also some Fukushima people. These people, as I told you before earlier, they feel responsibility. They have responsibility to continue doing this and then tell to the next generation, younger generation. Some of them really actually they don't have in good health, and then therefore they feel that's very, very important.
I just want to add a few things to that. It is a challenge for a volunteer group like us to stay and keep momentum, and we're doing something that is not as appealing or not as easy to understand as giving money for doing some emergency relief in a disaster hit area. This is a long-term project, so our goal is still for long-term. I think in terms of enthusiasm, to be very frank, it has changed over the years, but both in downward and upward trend. People that initially were very active were active because they had fear for their health, and Japanese people, I think I have a slightly different opinion. I think Japanese people are like people like anywhere else. The moment something affects your immediate health, your immediate family, people are as willing to volunteer or be activists as they can at that time. That drive is gone after 5 years. It just know what has happened. There's tremendous amount of information available, so that is gone. But as Kiki was saying, is that younger generations are getting on board because they want to personally verify what happened. They are going to live there for generations to come, and they want to tell their children what happened, and this is okay. I have measured it, and we see that growing. We have much more participation from universities, colleges that make a project around building this equipment, go measure with the kids. They learn lots of things from this because there's electronics and other things. So we see kind of a surge of interest coming from there. The other thing for us has been that this has grown outside of Japan quite. I'm not sure if we can show the world map, but this has become a global project, and that kind of keeps it energy going from back and forth. Knowing from the volunteers we were working with in Fukushima, some of these people literally have made it their mission to keep on doing this for the reasons Kiki was mentioning. We also have people that only come on board now that say, oh wow, I want to keep on continuing this. I think we mentioned that in Aizu, Kiki mentioned that the sensors that the government has put down throughout the city, they're being removed and they're moving you somewhere else where they want to measure. That actually is causing anxiety again because people are wondering why they're doing that. So we are actually trying to put sensors in those areas back. So because people just want to have confirmation, yeah, it's okay, it's going down, it's going out, it's fine, fine. And that confirmation you will have to do for generations to come, even after, it's now 30 years after Chernobyl. I was personally, I'm from Holland, so I still remember that pretty well. And even today in Europe, we have volunteers that are measuring primarily because they want to go and check what, after 30 years, what happened. Because nobody actually ever measured street by street in Europe either. So I think it's kind of a changing effects of different generations and different immediate need versus need to know and long term. But because the project is independent, allows people to very easily participate. It has kept its momentum till now, and we hope to obviously continue this momentum for many, many years to come. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That'll bring our event to a close, but for those of you who wish to keep in contact with our three guests, they will stay a few minutes to exchange meishi, so you can follow up with questions later, especially those of you who are writing articles on this issue. And also, I must say, they also have a lot of background knowledge about Fukushima issues, and they help to educate journalists, because many of us don't really know very deeply what it is we're talking about.
If I can add one thing, if you're going to Fukushima and you want to borrow one of our equipment, we do have equipment that can be borrowed, so you can use it, you can collect the information yourself. And we also have a small office. We all have our day jobs, but in the evenings we're there, and if you want to really sit down and learn about a specific topic, what we have been doing, you're more than welcome to come and visit us. Thank you very much.
All right, well, that is a very valuable service. So that brings us to an end. So for those of you who want to come up, please come up, and please join us at the next FCCJ press conference, where you can learn many more things. Okay, goodbye.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks.